Arrow functions are another way for us to create an anonymous function. They are going to behave very similar to function expressions. It's just the way we create them, it's going to be a little different. So let me show you an example. So I have those two functions. Let me just move this line here, otherwise it's going to be broken. So now it's working again. And now let me just create an arrow function using the same idea. I'm going to receive a message and I'm just going to log that message on the console. Once I call that sending an argument, I should get this one logged right here. So again, you can see exactly the same behavior. I create a function and then I can invoke that function whenever I need. With changes between an arrow function and a function expression, again, it's the way I create that. So instead of using the keyword function, I don't need the keyword before the parentheses, but after the parentheses, I need to include this equal, greater than, or this arrow where I am declaring this arrow function. There are some rules whenever I am creating a function, an arrow function. I just need to declare a list of parameters, use the arrow sign, and then the expression, the block that I need to execute. Some rules that we have here is this. If I am creating an arrow function, I need to use this open and close parentheses, even though if I'm not receiving any parameter. I need to have those, otherwise it's not going to work, and then I can use the arrow and create the block to execute my function. If I have a parameter, I will include the parameter inside the parentheses. If I have multiple parameters, I need to include all of them inside the parentheses. However, if I have only one parameter, I could just use the name of the parameter and I don't even need to use the parentheses. Let me show you an example. Let's go back to the code and let me just create an arrow function to sum some values. Let me create value 1 and then value 2. And then I want to return the sum of those two values. And whenever I need, I can call that function to get the result, and then I can log that result. So if I save this code right now, you can see that I get here the total 11 because I am calling this arrow function, which is getting the value 1, which is 5, value 2, which is 6, and then sum them and print. I can log that value. So I have created this arrow function approach for creating this function. So as I mentioned, for creating that, I'm going to use these parentheses and then the arrow sign and then the block of code that I want to execute. If I am not using any parameters, I must have those parentheses. If I don't, if I delete that, you can see that I get an error. Also, I could be receiving some values as parameters. So let's say that instead of declaring value 1 inside here, I want to receive the first value as a parameter, which means whenever I call that function, I need to provide this first value as an argument. So let's say now the first one is going to be 7. If I save, you can see that I get the new result. So now I have the parentheses, and between the parentheses I have the parameter. As I mentioned, there is this rule where when I have only one parameter, the parentheses become optional. So if I save now, you can see that I don't get any error. It still works even though I don't have the parentheses. However, let's say that I also want to receive the second value as a parameter. So if I include here comma and the second parameter, now I will get an error, even though if I try to send here, let's say 8, I get an error because I need to have the parentheses. If I put everything between parentheses, then it's going to work, no issues there. However, even though it is optional for us to use parentheses whenever we have only one parameter, it is recommended for you to always use parentheses. First, because you are going to have a standard. You don't have this situation, this scenario where sometimes you use parentheses, sometimes you don't. So it gets a little more explicit that parentheses is there. Also, if later you need to make a change and include a second parameter, you can easily just go ahead and include that. You don't need to go back and include the parentheses that is missing. So usually it is recommended to use parentheses even though you are using only one parameter inside your arrow function. Another thing to note here is whenever I am creating an arrow function, I will create a block of code, and inside this block of code I can have multiple lines. And then when I get to the end of that lines, I could have a return statement which will return something to my to the line that invoked that function. In this case, we are executing, we have this arrow function only which only has this return statement when I'm summing everything. There is one scenario, one exception for this scenario, where whenever I am simply returning something from my arrow function, I could change the way I write this. So instead of using the curly braces and then using the return statement, I could rewrite the same arrow function to be something like this. I have the sum, I receive everything, but then I don't need to use the curly braces, which means whatever I include after the arrow function is going to be automatically returned, so I don't need the return statement as well. I'm getting this error because I'm declaring sum twice, so I can get rid of the first one. If I save, you can see I still get the exactly same result. So if I am only returning, just have one line of code which returns something, I could omit these curly braces and also omit the return statement. It will behave exactly the same way. Usually in this scenario, we are going to include everything into a single line. So this is how I would create this arrow function, where I just return the sum of those two values. If I want to break that into multiple lines just so I can have a better view, I could use a parenthesis if I want to. So that would work exactly the same way. It would still just be returning something, but the parenthesis is different than using the curly braces. It's just optional, but it's just another way that I can accomplish the same thing. So this is it. This is how we can create arrow functions. They will behave very similar to function expressions, although there is some different ways how we can create arrow functions. There is one main difference between arrow function and function expression, which require a more complex example. And when we get to classes, I will show you an example where we can clearly view the difference between arrow function and function expression. Most of the time we can choose which one we want to use inside our application, but there are some cases where we must use one or the other to avoid the issues inside the application. Also related to functions, we have function return.